Okay, we have paused at a moment where, which essentially was like the final drop in Joker's transformation from essentially from Arthur Fleck to Joker, if you want to simplify it in that way. But also, like, I think that's a legitimate way of looking at it. What happens to him after going to the state asylum? He goes home, and like another part of brilliance of the movie is the portrayal of his suicidal thoughts, because there was a scene in the beginning of the movie where he was in the elevator with the neighbor that he dated, or so we thought. In the elevator with the neighbor, and the neighbor had her child there, and the child was a bit like rowdy, and the neighbor, like looking at Arthur, kind of did this kind of gesture out of like jest, like showing like comically, like, oh my god, it's so hard with my child, I'm gonna blow my brains out. And this is exactly what he imagined as he's like right after this scene that I described. He goes home and he feels completely defeated, and he imagines this and like kind of smiles, and it's a very quick shot, and it shows that he has suicidal tendencies immediately, very effectively, and in a very subtle manner, in a very smart way as well. Like it just goes to show that there's no need for like cliches or irresponsible glorification of suicide, which was only recently, by the way, with the premiere of the 13 Reasons Why TV show, put into spotlight, because the American Psychological Association kind of made a list of what's inappropriate in showing suicide in movies, due to like suicide prevention. 13 Reasons Why, if you didn't know, is a TV show that I really didn't enjoy, and it has what can tantamount essentially to glorification of suicide, and it's just the suicide itself is just it's almost glamorized, I would say, in that movie, and it's almost shown as like a as like a weapon almost against other people that wronged the person that committed suicide there. So that's kind of the example of like the worst possible way of portraying something like that, and this was much better. But that kind of like short shot was also supplemented with a huge realization that I did not expect, because he went, instead of going home, he went into the house of that neighbor of his, and sat down on the couch. And it was like the middle of the night, and when the neighbor went into the living room, she spots him and says, and like he is shocked, and says, "Your name's Arthur, right? From down the hall." And then like it suddenly, like, obviously hit me, just like anybody else in the audience that didn't see the film beforehand. He completely imagined the entire relationship through his delusion. That entire relationship that we have seen in kind of the spell of happiness and confidence that he had, that I talked about, was a complete delusion, and I did not see that coming. It was brilliantly executed. There was a moment, of course, the movie sometimes has to do, especially when it's targeting a wider audience, where it essentially shown a series of shots from like before, when Arthur and this neighbor of his were together out on dates and stuff, and like the neighbor disappeared from the shot, so as to like the less smart of us like understand that the relationship was a delusion. Of course, like when I see it, like it immediately hit me when she said it, and I think a lot of people would kind of understand what is meant. But I think like the movie, like I can forgive that, to be honest, because the movie has to, I guess, take everyone up to speed, or put everyone up to speed. What's the phrase? Put everyone up to speed. Whatever, you know what I mean. But yes, the relationship is an illusion. Very interesting indeed. What does it say about the movie? It of course reinforces his own like mental delusions. We can see that that like he obviously like even the happiness that he has in his life was part of the darkness, and because it was all a complete delusion. What is interesting, however, is that he doesn't have like a strong reaction. He isn't like, you know, it's not like he can't believe it. Oh my god, that this was all a delusion. This didn't happen, as you would see in normal, like usually in movies. Like for example, if you've seen, I almost spoiled a random movie for you. I will not do that. There is a big rule on this channel. Whenever we are discussing a movie, we can spoil anything like related to it. It's fine, but not different movies. So let me move away from that point. A mask is an illusion. You could say that as well. Like there's loads of symbolism. That's the neighbor, by the way, now on the screen. You could say that as well. Just like makeup, like clown makeup, meaning like I don't mean like actual female makeup. I'm not Jordan Peterson or anything. But yes, like you could say that Joker's mask is essentially like by him wearing a mask, he shows the mask of society of like keeping their smiles on while inside there's some kind of despair. Because the same thing could be made for the Joker as well. It could be said for the Joker as well. Like through him wearing a mask, it's essentially like a classic kind of villain, maniacal villain, and inside him there's this despair that was shown throughout the movie very, very well. So yes, I can completely understand. Like a mask is an illusion kind of explanation for that, definitely. But yes, once these scenes are over, he goes actually back to the hospital to visit his mom. He's sat there, kind of, you know, completely broken. There, we don't see despair in him anymore. It's just pure darkness, and that is only reinforced after he decides to pick up a pillow and smother his adoptive mother. Yes, if you haven't seen the movie, he kills his mother. After learning that he's adopted and that he was abused and being completely enveloped by darkness, he kills his very old mother that you could have seen on the pictures, by the way, before as well. Later on, so this is, by the way, his fourth murder. But later on, you know, what's more interesting is that he was invited to the Murray show. And the reason why is a bit far-fetched again, like that's another issue that I have with the realism of the movie, was because Murray showed like a clip of him in the stand-up studio, and he did manage to like have a legitimate stand-up, I guess, afterwards, but the beginning of the stand-up was just him laughing, and he couldn't stop because he had his condition, you know, he was nervous, so he was laughing maniacally, and he could not stop it. But only that clip was shown at Murray's and mocked, but there were apparently lots of calls about that clip, and because of that, the late night show decided to invite Arthur on, which, you know, that was something I didn't quite believe that would really happen in real life. Showing a clip of someone funny or someone you mock actually, and then inviting that person on the show, it's a bit of a stretch, I feel. But whatever, it happened. And as he's getting prepared, he's like fresh out of killing his own mother, and he's getting prepared, and then you know, his former colleagues from the job where he was fired at come over, and there's this, you know, Gary, his friend, and then there is another person, I forgot his name. He's a little person. I don't know what's the politically correct term. I think it's little person. Yeah, Yeah, I think so. But anyway, a little person, and Gary, who was shown before in the movie as like being kind of understanding towards him and not mocking him, and even giving him a gun. That was the gun that was used in the killings of those 3 people, the train. And Gary came to the apartment whilst he was putting on the makeup to go on the Murray show, while Arthur was putting on his makeup. And he went there to kind of get his story straight with Arthur. And Arthur just randomly takes scissors and punctures his artery in his neck, and very, very violently kills him by bashing his head against the wall and all kinds of other manners, stabbing his eyes. It was crazy. And probably the most glamorizing kind of violence shot, very Tarantino-esque scene in general. He then slumps down and actually lets the little person leave. But what was important and interesting about the scene is that this was the first murder that you could say was completely without course. There was no reason for it. There was no, like, even when, like, I also count reasons that are, you know, somewhat like deranged, or like something that I wouldn't do, obviously, or you wouldn't do, but it's understandable. It's like you can find the cause of those previous killings. Like, those 3 people attacked him and he felt humiliated by them, so it was part self-defense, part vengeance. His mother was also vengeance because of the abuse and continuous lying throughout his whole life. And also you could say that in his mother he could see his own derangement and his own mental issues, not only because of how his mother raised him, but also because of the genetics. And, you know, he kind of like kills that part, or attacks that part within him. But with Gary, there was no reason for the death. And it's right before he goes to the Murray show that you can see now. And what it shows, by the way, with the Gary killing is just that now he's just too far gone. Now he's killing out of madness. But before he actually goes to the Murray show, there is another iconic scene. Both of these iconic scenes are, by the way, at the end, essentially, or towards the end. Which is essentially him going out of the house after he kills Gary, and he dons his red suit with a waistcoat and his makeup, and he goes down the steps. The classic scene that everybody's seen, of him going to like a really cool music down some steps in Bronx, New York, and he's just dancing and going down these steps, and we can see kind of like the madness, but also kind of the glory and glamour of like his now like super confident, violent, villainous side, and his, you know, sense of like dark freedom from his despair after the violence that just ensued. And it's powerful, and powerful very much, not only for like how well it's shot, you know, because like even if you look at the scene and not have seen the movie, you could see like, you know, this is a cool scene because it's Joker in his colorful clothes and his colorful makeup with really cool music, and he's dancing down the stairs. So you can see that there's this classic kind of like madness, kind of cool kind of madness, like popularly cool, popular kind of cool madness. All right, okay. And so even like not seeing anything like that, the scene is cool in itself. But it comes on the coattails of essentially an hour and a half of like struggling, depression, despair, fear, laughter that's only connected to like the darkest and most stressful, nervous feelings, intense suffering, frustrations from the world, disenfranchisement, being shunned, and everything like that, that's kind of freed by the violence, and now like a complete snap in that person that makes that kind of like pushes him over the edge in absolute madness that's almost like freeing. And it's portrayed as freeing in the movie as well, as he dances down the steps to this cool music. So that's, you know, important. And right after the dance, he's discovered by the two police officers that have been investigating the case of the 3 killings, and a chase commences. And as you know, as the chase goes on, Joker runs into the metro. The 2 police officers go after him, and the thing is, his popularity rose to the level that civil unrest in the city that was caused by like economic issues, socio-economic issues, and everything like that, rose to the level that these people decided to wear the masks that you can see on the screen right now, and everybody was just going to a massive rally, like demonstrating these issues essentially, and everybody was wearing this mask. And as he runs into the metro, it's packed with people wearing the mask that's very similar to his makeup, which already was like kind of like a cool shot. And he steals one of the masks from another person. People start fighting. There starts a brawl. It's always amazing, by the way, in movies how quickly a brawl can start. Never really seen like a full pub brawl, so I can't really say if that's realistic or not. But it happened in this movie nonetheless. And the police officers are kind of like stopped in that brawl. One of them pulls a gun and like shoots either accidentally or intentionally one of the people that are trying to brawl with him. And as a result, both of the police officers are beaten down to the ground. And Joker kind of just puts on the mask and becomes one of many. So not only does he kind of get lost in the crowd, but he becomes the crowd. And he becomes the crowd just at the time as the entire crowd is beating down on the police. So you could see this whole scene as like him besting the police or like beating up the police, or any kind of authority. It doesn't have to be the police, but beating down the authority by becoming a crowd, becoming one of many, you know. So he now, through this like very cool shot where he just puts on the mask and everybody around him is like in the crowd, is now a shot, or rather a moment where he becomes part of the many. You know, he becomes the crowd. He becomes the civil unrest. He becomes the protest, essentially. That was very interesting. Going down from praise, we need to talk about the limitations again. And it's again has to do with realism. Really, the only issues that I had are a couple of these realistic like issues, or issues with realism in general. And one of these was, or another one of these was actually like him arriving in his suit and his makeup to the Murray show, and he's there in the backstage of the Late Show. You could have seen it on one of the photos. And he has the makeup on of all these rioters that just killed 2 police officers, and you know, pretty much the exact description of the person that killed those 3 Wall Street guys. So a very like extremely divisive, extremely controversial kind of costume that he has on, and he shows up in the Late Show, and the producer is like, you can't go like in front of camera like that. But Murray, the Late Show host, is like, no, it's gonna be fine. He actually, his exact quote was, "It's gonna work, trust me." And that is just, nah, that no, that wouldn't happen. Okay, Gotham is supposed to be like some kind of, it's a city where essentially Batman is from, and it's just like a fictionalized real American city. So you can kind of imagine Chicago, it would probably be the closest to it. Again, I'm not from the United States, but like that's what I came across on my research, that like Chicago would probably be closest, or New York, like you could say New York, even more so. So New York or Chicago, essentially, that's one of these cities. But he essentially, says it's gonna work, even though this person is dressed extremely controversially. And he goes out. He goes out onto the Late Show. That's taped live, much like late shows today and in the past. And then we are treated to probably my favorite scene in the entire movie. And I'm very glad we got here with my wits still about me, because this movie is full of wonderful things, and it really gripped me. I really enjoyed it. So I was a little worried that I would be, out of energy once we get here. But I still have energy to talk about this. And we are talking about the talk show scene, the scene of him essentially coming on as Murray kind of invites him in on the late show, whatever, and they talk about a multitude of things, but mostly about the killings. Joker says, he says essentially that he finds it funny that those 3 people died, saying that he's and Murray is kind of like, I don't find this funny. The show is kind of going haywire a little bit, and Joker says something to the effect of, I think it is funny, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. And there's multitude of like different things. There's like him saying a joke and nobody laughing. Joker essentially talking about like how people like can't see him on the street, essentially that he's completely like hidden away, that he's one of like many, and like probably like the richer people would completely miss him on the sidewalk. There's a series of things that he says that brings out so many themes and motives that are essentially why this scene is not only the favorite scene of me, my favorite scene, but also a very popular and very important scene in the whole movie. That's, I think, perhaps the most talked about. The several themes that it explores, among many, are like civility, which is maybe a little bit shoehorned in, because he literally said like, we are not civil anymore, which is like the one thing that kind of like I paused at a little bit, because he says it in a very much kind of political discourse of today kind of way, by the way the whole movie is supposed to take place in the 80s. But yes, he says, we're not civil with each other anymore, which is, yes, it kind of is similar to like his entire message in a way, I guess. But since he says, it's like, he speaks about civility in general, it kind of felt like, okay, but this is not the kind of thing that he would say, like it seemed like maybe too much of a refined approach to things. Like whenever you say like, I don't think we have enough civility, it's a very kind of civilized and measured way of saying things. But he said it, so it was a little bit shoehorned in, but I didn't mind that too much. He also spoke about people being out of touch, which is very much accurate in very, very many ways, especially also, not especially, but very much so in the United States when it comes to the elites, and wherever you are in the political spectrum, whether you're liberal, progressive, conservative, centrist, libertarian, or whatever, you have to kind of agree that when it comes to the elites, either the political elites or the Hollywood elites, they are very much disconnected from the real kind of issues of everyday Americans, for example, of people that live paycheck to paycheck and can't put the down payment on their cars or anything like that. You can only you don't have to look far to see examples of this. Like you can look at Jennifer Lawrence, and I don't have anything against Jennifer Lawrence, but like Jennifer Lawrence is the first one that came to mind. It was kind of controversial when she said like, we need to fight against global warming, people need to recycle more, we need to tell them that it's important, and she had all this all this speech, like trying to teach people about the global warming and the necessity to do all these little things, while flying to all of her shoots in her private jet. And that is, that is not the extent of out of touchness that Joker was touching on, but it does come from, I feel, the same frustration with people that they have of the elites. I think none more so than Americans. And it's also very interesting that this sentiment was portrayed in what pretty much amounts to a Hollywood movie. So, this was portrayed by the elites, and a very kind of in touch understanding of this kind of sentiment. One of the many reasons why this movie is so popular, by the way. And this, and the another theme, actually, yes. He says, "If it was me dying on the sidewalk, you would walk right over me," which is very much an iconic quote, and it shows the double standard in very, very many ways. And now I put examples of those many ways here as well. I said I didn't want to get too political, but perhaps it is important in order for this review to have as wide a scope as I feel it should have, because this kind of double standard of if it was me dying on the sidewalk, you would walk right over me, is a sentiment that I feel is very kind of current in the way of political development in the United States, especially when it comes to racism, riots, George Floyd riots that happened last year, for example, in August, and the divide essentially between conservatives and liberals when it comes to questions of police brutality, when it comes to disenfranchisement of the poor, disenfranchisement of the felons, disenfranchisement of low-income black communities, for example, and all of these things that like maybe aren't the exact thing that this quote is supposed to represent, but they are the kind of feeling of those people that can manifest themselves, like in the riots that I was talking about, for example, or in these kind of political questions in today's society, politics, and the double standard in like viewing your fellow man. And I feel that that's what this portrays, on top of the civility and on top of like being out of touch. It was just like, and also like not only that, but there was also like not understanding non-understanding of people that are different from you, in this case of mentally people that have mental disorders or mental illnesses, all kinds of disenfranchisement, again, as I said, all of these things, all these themes and motives just shown in this little conversation between Joker and Murray, that of course ends with him pulling out his gun. And what he planned to do in the beginning was that he would pull out the gun, Joker would, and killing himself after saying, "Do you want to hear a joke?" But Murray, kind of constantly putting him down, I guess changed his mind, and instead he pointed the gun at Murray and shot him in the head in a very kind of, again, violent way. The movie actually showed a wide angle of the killing that looked extremely realistic again. And yeah, that was it for that like pretty much penultimate scene. But the movie wasn't done yet. The symbolism didn't end yet, because in like the last 5 to 6 minutes there was the time for police ride, where Joker was looking out of the window of the police ride and looking at the riots that erupted all around the city throughout the evening. The riots that started in the afternoon, essentially, where we witnessed them going in the metro when they killed the police officer, and the riots now in the evening, like being actual riots of people just essentially breaking the glasses of business stores or storefronts, putting police cars on fire and everything like that, while Joker is being transported by a police car. And there is this like wonderful shot of him looking out the window and like laughing, smiling, and it's like a wonderful comparison between the beginning of the movie and now the ending of the movie. Because at the beginning of the movie there's this long scene of him looking out the window, this very kind of French style, kind of dark and gloomy, not only person but also visuals looking out the window in a depressed way as he goes in the metro. But now he's in the back of the police car, looking out the window in exactly the same angle, with a huge smile on his face and laughing as he looks at all the mayhem and chaos around the town, the riots, because the way he sees it is that the anger and despair and frustration that was manifesting and building up inside of him was now out and manifested itself and demonstrated itself on the outside world thanks to his action. So he found that beautiful. He actually literally said, because the police officer witnessing him laughing said, "You find this funny, freak?" or something to that effect. And he said, "No, I found it beautiful." But then, because of the riots, somebody, I guess, got a hold of an ambulance and ran into the police car. And the police officer presumably died upon the crash. And people actually carried the Joker out of the car. Many people were carrying him as he was still unconscious. And so he was lying down on like their arms in a very interesting way that made me remember the classic scene of Spider-Man. It's one of the few Superman movies that superhero movies that I've actually seen. I think it was Spider-Man 2 with Tobey Maguire, where they carry Spider-Man as he's unconscious after saving a bus or something, I guess, and like New Yorkers are carrying him on their backs, saying like, "Carefully, he's a hero," or whatever. Very similarly to how they were now carrying out Joker in kind of like a heroic way. You know, he was kind of unconscious, almost, you know, like weak, and they were kind of carrying him like a hero. And that made me think like, is this like, so he's the anti-hero? Is that the hero of like our time in some ways? You know, is that what the film represents? Like, that is now the hero, whilst Spider-Man was the hero portrayed in this scene back in 2004 or whenever that movie was made. But now it's this guy. But then again, there is a scene towards the end of the movie where Joker regains consciousness. Or not, actually it's the same scene, but like shot I meant. Where Joker regains consciousness and stands on the crashed police car and starts dancing, and there's a huge crowd, massive crowd of people around him cheering him on as he, you know, finally gets what he wanted, the adoration of masses. And, you know, we see the way he enjoys it, the way he smiles, that it's more about the adoration, that he feels adored rather than famous or infamous. So an interesting shout out again to all the applause that he imagined, or the way that he imagined the applause back when he was still Arthur Fleck, at the beginning of the movie, when he imagined his whole like daydreaming with Murray kind of thing. Then we actually have the final scene, which is more like an epilogue of the Joker sitting down with a person in like a therapy room, presumably at the asylum, because he was declared criminally insane, I guess. And we are treated to the final line of the movie, which is essentially the social worker asking Joker like what he finds funny again, and he says, "You wouldn't get it," which is like a classic line that can be said again and again and again. When it comes to like, oh, you wouldn't get it, you use it in an everyday kind of way. But the brilliance of using that is that like you kind of look beyond it a little bit, because it's the last line of the movie, and you kind of discover like beneath the curtains that you wouldn't get it can refer to the social divide, suffering, nobody understanding you, the cruelty of society, like this complete misunderstanding in the way we look at possibly radicalized people, or people like Joker. That's what we all want, to be loved, yes, but some people want it in a very different kind of way. I guess there is a need for adoration that can be pathological and dangerous, obviously, which this movie shows very well. But that is it for the analysis portion. Now I'll just shortly conclude what I felt about the movie. So, as you could have guessed, I enjoyed it immensely. It was a brilliant movie. It was extremely well executed, and it only had tiny flaws in realism. What do you think about the end of the film? By the way, this is the shot of the window, of him looking out the window at the beginning of the movie that I told you about. That was the kind of window shot that I saw the contrast in. What do I think of the end of the movie? Well, I didn't mention that after he says you wouldn't get it, there is also a shot of him walking down a hallway while making bloody footprints on the ground, essentially suggesting that he killed that woman, that social worker. So it ends again in violence. So the ending of the film, we will talk about it a little more, but like it's both made very well. Like the art speaks to you in a very powerful way, but the way it speaks to you is like a form of contention. It can be viewed as very controversial, because having such a strong language in such a theme can be dangerous for people depending on who it looks, and we will look at it a bit more. So what I would just to answer your question, I think it's kind of beautiful in a very, very terrible way. Not the movie itself, the art form, but what it portrays. Yeah, that would essentially be what I meant. But yes, back to what I loved about the movie. Again, is the character development that is absolutely phenomenal, carried very much by Joaquin Phoenix, but not only him. When it comes to the visuals, we talked about the psychology of the darkness and gloominess of the visuals that are portrayed there. Of course, the director as well, the way everything is set up and shot, just adds to the storytelling in a beautiful way. And the way that this character development is and the portrayal of his descent into madness in general is actually conceived. It gives credence to the violence. It's not just violence for the sake of violence. Like, we understand like where that violence comes from because of how well it's portrayed, how well it's talked about and revealed. And not only that, it's it also makes all of these really violent, not violent, really cool scenes, like him dancing down the stairs, or him riding in a police car, or him like being confident in front of Murray. It gives these scenes even more power, because we know what preceded it and what built up that character inside him that makes him, that cool. Him just walking out of the train station with his full makeup and just smoking and everything. I had a shot of that there as well. Because we know that all of these images and all these cool scenes were preceded by what you see on the screen right now. By that feeling. And an intense and very deep kind of characterization that went into that created that person that's walking, towards us in that cool shot, essentially. So yes, that was very powerful. And of course, as I said, the music and the visual color in particular, that is, an atmospheric storytelling, was completely on point. It only reinforced the wonderful character development. The way I saw it very much, in a way, because again, it's a Joker movie. It's a movie about Joker, who is a known character of the DC Comics franchise. It's perhaps like a deeper endeavor into the mind of the villain, a kind of more modern and complex view of the 2D storytelling of a superhero movie focused on the villain, you know. And it's not just about villain and how he came about, how he gained his superpower or whatever. It's nothing like that. It's actually him having this psychological journey towards that madness and like the reality. And I was shocked, not shocked, but I was surprised that the movie could have gone so simple with it, and it would still make just as much money, you know, because it's Joker. Everybody would have seen it. But instead, the movie actually creates something that makes me wonder, like, why even make it about Joker? This movie, I think, would be just as successful without him. Maybe not, because maybe not enough people would go and see it, because it's not part of the DC Comics, that, you know, or whatever, the known superhero franchise. But at the same time, the quality of the movie would not be decreased at all if this was a story about a random person. The way it works, and of course, like, the aesthetic of the Joker is very popular, and you know, it's known, so that makes the movie work as well. But again, the movie can stand on its own two legs. It doesn't need like the other stories of the franchise. It's just very, very good on its own. So yeah, I very much enjoyed it. But before we close sort of the chapter behind this, I kind of alluded to it before, but we do need to talk a little bit about the social responsibility of the movie. Because the thing is, right, it's very deep. It's a very deep story, and characterizes like the feeling of despair and frustrations very, very well. So well, in fact, that you can very much empathize with that person. And the closer you are to his mental state, presumably, the closer you can the more you can empathize with him. Excuse me. And because of that, it can be viewed as very irresponsible that essentially what was the ultimate resolution for this person was absolute violence and inflicting suffering upon others. Because he does suffer through like strong like mental, you know, there are mental issues, there's depression, there's suffering, it's cruelty of the society, the feeling of injustice in many, many different ways. But once he starts being violent, once he starts killing people, he becomes this cool and confident and happy character. And all these cool shots and all these best scenes is when he essentially becomes the Joker and starts killing people, which can very much be viewed as like violence being the answer, you know. And there are people like, for example, Richard Lawson from Vanity Fair that I talked about before, but many, many others that talked about like how this, you know, this is essentially, somebody said literally, I think I have a, oh yes, I have a quote from Vox here, an incel radicalization manual. If you're not sure about the terminology there, incel, spelled INCEL, is literally means involuntarily celibate, and it's a name of a group of young men that feel that they are not like sexually satisfied, or that they cannot be sexually satisfied, that they are involuntarily celibate because they are either unattractive or and connected to that, they are shunned by society, and from this group that holds very radical, like sort of anti-female and anti-establishment thoughts, there came like prolific shooters. I don't know if prolific is the right word, but like really bad shooters that killed many people. And some people argued that this is very much the kind of radicalization, because by the Joker killing these people, they show him almost feel like a sense of freedom. And even though he ends at the asylum, he still manages to, the very last shot is of him killing that social workers, and not actually killing the social worker, but it's assumed because he's walking away on the hallway and he makes bloody footprints, and he's then like in the back. I don't know if you noticed, but in the back he's actually chased by an orderly. So you could very much say like this movie is kind of irresponsible in a way, how it glamorizes this violence and glorifies it. But then at the same time, there's a book that was written in the 18th. Is it the 18th century? I actually don't have the year here. It's the 18th or the 19th century. And the book is called The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang Goethe, one of the most famous authors of all time. Historically, German author. And The Sorrows of Young Werther is essentially a story that's written as like a series of love letters from and this is from the pre-romantic period, and these love letters are essentially of a young man, but like not like a super young man, but let's say, I don't know, 30 for example, that he writes to a woman that's engaged, and he professes his love to her, and they kind of like have some kind of romantic thing of some kind, but then like he writes in length about his despair in a very pre-romantic fashion. That's the way they were writing back then. And it's so kind of like heart-wrenching. Sorry, I wasn't actually like tearing up. I had read the book. It's fine, but it's so like heart-wrenching that apparently back in the day, at least, it inspired or like pushed people over the edge that had suicidal thoughts. So because the book, like the way it ends, I won't spoil how it ends, apparently like drove some people, like this is a very like big simplification of like calling it that, but like kind of drove people to suicide, which obviously made the book very controversial. But I think that's something that we can kind of compare it to, because the larger question when you say like, okay, this movie might radicalize some, or like one person, for example, or two or three people, it might radicalize them to do something terrible. And at that point you have to ask, what do we do then? Do we ban art like that? Is this like art suddenly like, do we have censorship of art at that point? And if so, like how do we censor it and what do we censor? There are people. I'll actually, like, if you want to imagine exactly like what the people talked about on its critics, I actually have some quotes here. See, I'm prepared. I really enjoyed the movie, so I made a lot of research. Jesus Christ, there's so many. Alright, just bear with me. Here it is. Okay. So, Rachel Miller from... where's she from? From Vox, I believe. States, okay, I've pinpointed exactly what it is that bothers me about a Joker movie. I don't want to watch a movie that shows us the trauma that drove the Joker insane. I don't want to watch a well-intentioned but unstable man get bullied until he turns into a mass murderer. I don't want to watch a man get rejected by women as an excuse for his future of domestic abuse. I don't want to be shown what a poor, unfortunate underdog this man was, who was sadly forced by circumstances and that nasty Batman to take up a life of crime. I don't want to have sympathy for a man best known for his robbery and murder, shoved down my throat for 2 hours. I don't want this to be sold as a relatable story that can happen to anyone with a bad enough day, and I don't want to be around any of the lovely white boys who relate to it. Do you see what I'm getting at? It continues on in the same note, but this is a longer one. So I have some thoughts on the new Joker trailer with Joaquin Phoenix. In a time of increasing violence perpetrated by disaffected white men, again, it's a bit racial. Is it really the best thing to keep making movies that portray disaffected white men doing violence as sympathetic? The new Joker is starting. There's another tweet, by the way. The new Joker movie is starting to look like a sympathetic tale of wronged by society white dude and their entitlement to violence. Okay, I'm done with work for the day. You have a good night, my friend. No worries, mate. Thanks for joining us, and you have a great day as well, of course. Have a nice weekend. But yes, so that's sort of what I was talking about, right? It's full of controversy, and whether you want to take the racial note, which I don't really subscribe to in this sense. At least I don't think that the movie has any kind of like racial or racist undertones at all. You could argue, and I would completely understand if you could argue, if you want to argue that it is rather a controversial thing when it comes to the violence, and the violence being the answer to the feelings that this person has. You know what I'm getting at? It's that. But there are other interpretations for the movie. There is, of course, the strong message of an anti-establishment that I laid out. There is this kind of aesthetic of the Joker as rather being an anti-establishment person rather than like a mentally deranged person turned psychopath, like a killing psychopath. A psychopath actually isn't the right word, like a serial murderer essentially. And the kind of aesthetic of Joker was inspired by many people at anti-establishment protests across the world when it comes to in the 2019-2020 period in particular. Like, for example, in Hong Kong, the protesters were wearing clown masks to protest the Chinese the Chinese ban on wearing masks. The Chinese ban on wearing masks. This was before the COVID, by the way, before COVID. During the Hong Kong protests, the Chinese government that was occupying Hong Kong, essentially, or trying to take over Hong Kong, was like banning masks, and they were wearing Joker masks in protest, and then etc. There were Chilean protests in Los Angeles where everybody wore Joker masks, and Joker masks also featured during the Yellow Vest protests in 2019 France as well, where the firemen also set themselves on fire and attacked the police. I think violence is just a hyperbolic tool here. You could argue that, but the thing is, like, understandably, when you see that level of violence kind of connected to a feeling of threat and like frustrations and being shunned by society, and that like kind of being the freeing factor, you could argue that it's not a very responsible message to be sending, And yes, it is a hyperbolic tool in a sense that it's like it can be viewed as a hyperbolic tool. Like I'm not sure whether I completely agree with that, because it can be viewed as like just him snapping, and the kind of visualization of building up hatred and anger, and how it looks when that building up has nowhere else to go. It just explodes. It also sells. Yeah, of course. Like, that's, at the end of the day, you have to think of that. My thoughts on the controversies of this movie. I'm a writer, and I do produce movies, indie movies. So I feel it would be dishonest, and it just generally isn't my principle. Any kind of censorship. I believe all art should exist. If we find links, which, by the way, there aren't any links. For example, that video games would cause violence, or that movies would cause violence. There aren't any links or psychological studies that cause that, so it's very based on people's feelings. But if we were to find that the movies like this actually manage to radicalize people to an extent, even a couple of people, then what should be done, like, of course, first and foremost, I guess R-rated, R ratings should be enforced a little more, when it comes to like parents showing that to their children not being allowed in cinemas to see stuff like that, or like streaming sites actually requesting that, you know, you put your child's age in it, so it can restrict that child's viewing opportunities when it comes to Netflix or something like that, possibly like that, but never to censor art. Art can never be censored, because whenever you censor it to any degree, you cannot have art as we know it. You cannot have the free expression of ideas, and in free expression of ideas, and only in completely free expression of ideas, you can create art that's actually worth it. Because even if you limit something like this, it has an effect on other filmmakers and how they make movies, seeing as like banning stuff is just completely destructive to an author's creativity. Would you